Powell, City Hall Bureau Chief with City and State. Joining me on today's City and State TV is Gene Russianoff. He's an attorney for the Straphangers Campaign, which is part of the New York Public Interest Group. Thank you for joining us today, Gene.
Glad to be here.
So, Gene, you're something of a public transit and transportation expert as far as in New York City and elsewhere in the state. I wanted to talk about the MTA Capital Plan that was just released this week. It's a $32 billion plan with a $15 billion gap for the capital project. So let's talk first about, you were at the board meeting where they voted to approve this plan. Let's first talk about the deficit. $15 billion is obviously a lot of money, but that's also on top of, I think, $34 billion in outstanding debt that the agency already has. So what was talked about in terms of the deficit, in terms of how to close that gap?
Well, they really didn't. They set the ball in motion. And I think one thing for your viewers to know is that this has happened before. They've put out 5-year capital plans with big holes in them, and it's been challenging and difficult to fill them. But I would stress the importance of it. There have been 7 plans since 1982, and they're why the subways are so much better than they were in 1982, when the new subway cars and the stations and the buses and the track and the signals. And so it's a very vital program. All the possibilities for filling the gap are hard, difficult, really a big lift, as they say in Albany. And I'm hopeful that they'll figure out ways to do it. They have some choices. One choice is to slim down the program, which we think would be a mistake. I think Superstorm Sandy showed how unbelievably important the subways are to the city, and cutting back on important programs for buses and subways is, I think, very short-sighted. Then there's one that I personally think is the smartest idea, which is right now the way transit is funded is that everybody who benefits pays. So the riders pay through fares, the drivers through tolls and a gasoline tax, real estate developers through a very sizable real estate tax, corporations, businesses, and the notion is that you can't move your goods, you can't have customers, you can't have valuable property if you don't have a system to get people to and from there. So that's been suggested to hike some of those taxes relatively, not a giant amount, but an amount that would cover their financial needs. And then there's one that, I'm sure your viewers will all know about, which is putting tolls on the East River bridges, or what's called congestion pricing. Right. Yeah, the proponents, of which my group is one, we call it fair tolling. And the way it works is that some bridge tolls would get imposed, like Manhattan or Brooklyn, and some tolls would go down, like the Verrazano and the Throgs Neck Bridge. And we have this crazy system where the most congested parts of the bridges don't have tolls. Right. And there's no logic, so those are some of the choices, and they're difficult. And I left out the one that probably is the most likely to happen if the past is prologue, which is they'll borrow the money, and you referred to it. They have $33 billion in outstanding debt that they borrowed largely since the year 2000. And it's bigger than many nations around the world, and it means that before a bus or a subway car roll out of the depot, or before a station booth clerk gets to their job, you already owe about $2.5 billion a year. That's what it costs to pay back the $31 billion. Right. So that's all for past debt, and if they do it again, it's just to pile on and make the system, this finances shaky.
Right. Now, let's look back a little bit. I mean, you mentioned that this outstanding debt goes back to the year 2000. What's contributed to the kind of slow erosion of a steady funding stream for the MTA? Is it all politically related? Is it a combination of the state and city kind of decreasing their share of funding, or what's happening?
Transit's like healthcare, like housing. It's political, and decisions about how much to give and what to support and how you value it against other important needs of the city, or that's the way it is. It was a lot easier for the Powells to borrow the money than to come up with the money.
Right.
And when the program first started, way back in 1982, the feds gave close to 40% of the program,
right.
and that's been changing in recent years. And the state almost got entirely out of the business of giving money to transit, and the city for a really long time has given they give about $500 million every 5 years for this transit system, which is 468 stations and 6,000 subway cars, and is incredibly important to the city. So they could borrow the money, but there'll be a high price to pay for it, or they could figure out ways to pay, ways that make sense, that advance the city's economy and also gives us a transit system that provides us with unparalleled mobility.
Right.
Your viewers won't know this, but we're basically the only system in the world that has express service.
Right.
You go to Paris or London, you stop at every stop. I took my family to Paris once, and at 11:30 they said the metro's closing down, and
right. Take that for granted.
Yeah,
right.
So it was quite a shock, So we get a lot of value for the system that we have, and for my group, the big issue is what should the riders pay as part of the mix for that. And there have been 4 fare increases in the last 7 years, and they were planning one that was going to be twice the rate of inflation. So there will be a fare hike in next March. In 2015, it'll be about 4%. Nobody likes a fare hike, but it's fair to ask the riders to make their contribution to a better transit system.
And was the prospect of even further fare hikes after this coming one broached at the meeting on Wednesday?
Not in a coherent way, you'd understand. But if you talk to the officials at the MTA, they're enamored of a fare hike every 2 years, so they have some planning and some regularity. And
right.
We're, as a riders group, we're open to that, depending on what the amount is and what the other parties pay. Because if you get a fare increase, but the drivers or real estate developers are off the hook, you're not such a good bargainer.
Right. Right, exactly. Now, I wanted to ask also about some of the large-scale projects that are included in the capital plan. 2nd Avenue Subway, East Side Access, expanding Metro North. So these are all projects that they have planned but don't necessarily have the money for. So how does that work in terms of moving them forward? Is it all on hold until the money is...
No, they're very they're very committed at the MTA to these projects, and it raises the most essential priority question, which is, do you put the money into fixing things so that the 7.5 million of us who take it have a better ride, or do you push these projects forward? And I've become convinced by my colleagues that there's value to like take the 2nd Avenue subway. They're going to build 3 stops, so
right.
they got to, and they're a long way from the 17 stop line that they want to build down to the financial district, they're going to build 2nd Avenue and 96th Street, 86th Street, and 72nd Street, and then it's going to cross over into the Broadway line, the N and the R, so you'll be able to get from the east side all the way into Brooklyn. It's going to really relieve the crowding on the 4, 5, and 6, which is the busiest line in the, maybe the world. It's certainly in the northern hemisphere.
Yep.
3 subway lines, and they move 30% of the daily customers
right.
in the system. So 2nd Avenue makes sense as a value to the existing customers, and East Side Access, it's becoming like almost a joke in terms of how over budget and behind schedule it is, and there are good arguments for that project also, but one's patience gets tried, and and it started out at like 4.4 billion, and they really don't know. But easily double digits now.
Right, right. Now, so the board approved the plan overwhelmingly, and it moves now to the Capital Plan Review Board. Is there any chance that, given the deficits and the financial gap, that they won't approve this plan?
Well, it's probably going to be like in the past, which is they have 90 days. It gets to day 87, 88,
Right.
89, and one of the parties, either the state assembly or the governor's office, says, "Why don't you withdraw the plan because we have questions about it, and we'll take it up later in the next year." And so that's what I think is going to happen. One of the Senate will say there's not enough money for highways, or there's no money for highways, and they have their own serious problems in terms of funding, or there's some of the priorities are wrong from their point of view, and the MTA will withdraw it, and it will get taken up later in the winter when the full state budget is taken up. And traditionally what's happened is in the last 10, 15 years, they've gone to March, and then they've written a blank check saying you can borrow this some money. And what do you say to that? It's bad for the state's future. People of all ideologies they're stunned when they hear the amounts that are involved. The MTA chairman, Tom Prendergast, is very committed to trying to find some real revenues, and we and a lot of other groups will support him and make our case for why the subways and the buses are so important to the future of the city.
Right. Actually, before we wrap up, I just wanted to ask about the bus aspects, because we haven't talked about that yet. Was there talk about expanding BRT, bus rapid transit, and select bus service?
They have religion now at the MTA. It's finally made it really clear to them, been made very clear to them that you can't build these rail lines maybe for decades, but you certainly can't build them overnight.
Right.
And so having bus service that goes from Flushing to Jamaica directly, or from Sunset Park to the biggest employer in the region, the airport, JFK Airport, that these are create new access and opportunities for people to jobs, to healthcare, to education, and so they committed themselves to building 2 BRTs. I'm not sure about the time frame, but the sooner than later. And I think it's going to happen. I think we're going to get maybe Woodhaven Boulevard as a place where the buses will run almost as fast as the subways do, and people have alternative means of getting around. So we're very excited about that as a long-term possibility for the city, and it was part of what made the reaction to Sandy. So they call them bridge buses.
Right.
So we look forward to the city rethinking some of its surface transportation policies.
Right. Maybe alleviating some of the problems in those transportation deserts in the city. Gene Russianoff, he's the attorney for the Straphangers Campaign, part of the New York Public Interest Group. Thanks for joining us today, Gene.
It was great.